Today I'm going to talk about 90% of what you need to know about trout fishing so that you don't make the common mistakes that other people are making. You're going to learn where to fish, how to target big fish, and you're just going to learn as much as I can teach you in the next 15 minutes. I know that people don't like how fast I go in a lot of the earlier videos, so I'm going to try to slow it down a little bit, but still keep it into 15 minutes. So here we go. If you want to consistently catch trout in rivers or lakes, wherever you're fishing, it's going to take time. I think a realistic expectation is that it's going to take you months, if not years, to learn a specific river and learn to fish it really well. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is that they go to one river, it's really hard, and then they go to another river and they just never take the time to just master one river or one section of a river before they move on to another and totally give up on that river or lake, whatever they're fishing. I used to fish lakes and I just got my butt handed to me. I was not very good at it, but what I didn't realize is that there were people catching humongous trout, like you're talking 5-6 pound trout in these lakes, and it wasn't until I just committed, like, I'm gonna learn this lake hell or high water. I'm going to learn it as well as I can. And when I invested that time and just committed to it, I started to get very, very good. And people always say, hey, you're really good at fishing this lake. What are you using? Asking me for advice. It's not that I'm good, it's just the fact that I fish this lake all the time. I outfish anybody on the lake because I am the one there who's consistently fishing it the most. The same thing for rivers. If you have a person who is a fishing guide, they have fished that section of that river every month of the year. They fish it with different clients, all the different scenarios that you could even imagine, and they're sharing those experiences with the other guides in that fly shop. So they have a tremendous amount of experience on that one river. Now, can a guide on one river go and be successful on another one? Sure, but in general, they're not going to be nearly as effective or as good as another guide that fishes that river every single day. Some of the guides in the fly shop that I know in Montana spend an enormous amount of time on these rivers. They're on those rivers every single day. They have things dialed. They know exactly what worked yesterday, what worked last year at that same time of year, what flies to use, what is their new trends, what is the new technology, the new bobbers, indicators, that kind of stuff. They have it pretty dialed, so it takes a long time realistically to get good at it. Number two is that the time of day is absolutely critical for you catching fish. If you show up on a river or a lake and you're fishing everything that is right at the wrong time of day, you're not going to catch anything. You're just going to throw your fly rod down. You're going to say, that river, I'm done with it. It doesn't hold any fish. The fish are all dead. They're not even there. You're going to have all these excuses, but you're just fishing at the wrong time of day. What I mean by that is the right time of day is when the fish are feeding, and they're feeding aggressively. You're going to have a pre-hatch, a hatch, and a post-hatch situation pretty consistently throughout the year, mostly starting from March all the way through October. You're going to have these hatches. Now, if you don't know what a hatch is, it's basically where the flies come up from the bottom of the river and they start to come up and they breed and they lay their eggs, and that's when the fish feed on them. And how many of those bugs and the quantity of bugs is going to determine how many fish you're going to catch. If you have the right setup and you're not catching anything early in the morning and the hatch doesn't start till 1, at 1 o'clock, you're gonna just start hammering fish because you have the right setup. So it's very important to learn that the time of day is absolutely critical for when you're gonna catch these fish. Some of the rivers that I know very, very, very well and lakes, I will only show up during the hatch time of day. In the cold weather months, when the blueing olives come off in the early season on some of these lakes and rivers, I will show up only during the time that I'm going to catch fish, which is sometimes around 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock earlier in the season. That time of day is critical. I see these people showing up to lakes in the evening. I know they're not going to catch anything because I have that experience to know that the time of day is when I'm going to catch fish. I won't even fish any other time before or after that because it's so cold outside. It's snowing, it's blowing wind, it's rainy. I know that if I just show up and I can fish that lake or that river during that period of time, just only during the hatch, then it's game on for me. In my opinion, it's not worth fishing a lot of these rivers and lakes at the wrong time of day when there are no hatches. Because a lot of times what the fish will do is they'll just get gorged and they'll get not hungry. They basically will stop eating because they know when the hatch is, especially in a tailwater, they'll just sit there and do nothing. It doesn't matter what fly you put in front of their face, they're just basically like half asleep. And then when they start eating and the hatch starts getting really significant, then it's just game on. So I will typically target those times of day And once you learn that, that's the biggest key that I can teach anybody. And it's very difficult to teach it on YouTube, but you just have to get out there and consistently figure out what that time of day is. And then everything gets exponentially easier. So that's the number 2 thing that I would recommend mastering, is when to fish those when to fish those lakes or rivers. Number 3 is that your gear isn't going to help you catch fish. It's going out with the first and second point, learning the time of day, and consistently going out there and fishing. That's where you're going to learn to catch a lot of fish. And then buy the nice equipment once you've mastered that and you get to that skill level. But the type of rod, how much money you spend on your rod, what type of net you have, none of that's going to matter if you're not actually catching fish. So if you go back to step 1 and 2 of this video, you learn to master those, then you can start upgrading your gear. But I would just get like really inexpensive gear to start out with. You don't need the fanciest rods. You can catch fish if you know what you're doing on a $10 rod you get at a garage sale just as much as you can catch on a $1,000 rod. It doesn't really matter. The next thing is to fish fewer flies more often. So just take 6 fly patterns and expand to maybe 12 and just get those consistently down. Find the ones that are working and then you can expand from there. But people get so caught up in, I like this fly, or I saw this guy fishing this one fly on this specific river, and then get caught up in the fly shop of them selling you a bunch of flies that may work under certain conditions, or if you use them as a guide service, it'll actually work for you. But don't get too caught up in getting an overabundance of flies. If you have 100 different fly patterns and you don't know which one to use, it's going to be confusing. Just narrow that down to 6 fly patterns, and I can try to help out in another video on which of those flies to use and which ones I would recommend. There's certain ones that I would recommend as staples and certain ones that I would recommend just staying away from. You can get those at a more advanced level, but just keep it simple. Instead of spending your money on upgrading your equipment thinking that's going to help you, oh, if I had this type of boot lace on my boots, I'm going to catch more fish because I can walk farther. Just use the equipment that you have, save that money, and use what you have, and take the extra money and spend that in gas. Spend that in a guide service so you can learn how to fish these rivers and how they fish it, and learn as much as you can from those guides. Talk to other fishermen, join a fishing club, join a fishing group, read magazines. Get out there and spend your money on going fishing more and less money on buying equipment. Another thing is that if you feel like you're a bad fisherman because you're not catching big tarpon or big fish or big trout like you see in some of the fly fishing films, that's okay, because those films are specifically filmed with high budget. Some of these films are $10,000, $20,000 to make these films. You don't really know that when you're watching it. It just looks so awesome and you're so captivated by it. But if you think you're anything less than those people just because you're not catching fish, don't worry about that, because I am actually a fly fishing filmmaker. I've been part of this fishing film tour for over a decade now, and I can tell you, when you see me on film and those films on the big screen, I look like a big shot and I look all fancy. But to be honest with you, it's hours of editing, the 99% of stuff that you don't see, which is me trying to figure out what's working, me throwing my fly rod down because I'm angry, I get really upset and the wind's blowing and just stuff's not working for me. But you don't see that because you're caught up in the 1% that I edit down to so that we can make a really good fly fishing film. Some of those trips, man, we're going up to northern Montana, we're going to Iceland. Those aren't cheap trips, and we're using guides in those videos to show us. If I go to Iceland, you need a guide. You cannot do it on your own. That's my best piece of advice when anybody asks me about going to Iceland. Long story short, don't get caught up in those videos if you think you are not very good because you're not catching fish like that. Some of those guys are fishing with guides that's all they do is breathe, eat, and sleep fly fishing. They're out there every day. So of course they're going to be catching the fish, and it's a whole nother world when you talk about the film industry. Another thing is, if you're fishing for trout, you're fishing at walking pace water. Don't fish water that is too fast. Don't fish water that is too slow. Walking pace. It took me a long time to learn this when I was a young kid trying to learn where to fish. It's walking pace water everywhere you go. And you're going to find that sweet spot once you start catching fish. And that type of water, you're going to get it dialed down because every river is very similar in the fact that it's walking pace. So don't get too caught up in fishing all of the water, because most of the fish, in my opinion, sit in a very small column of water. But once you figure out where that little 10% of that water is, you're going to start catching way more fish because you're going to learn the pace of the water that those trout like. Now when it comes to bass, fish in hot weather, the hotter the better. 100, 110 degrees, 115 even better. They're much more aggressive and you're going to have a better time. Some guys like to fish bass early and late in the season during the spawning period when it's a little bit cooler because those little fish aren't as active. But if you want to catch a large number of bass, not necessarily big ones. Fish as hot water as you can. That's rivers and lakes. Don't get caught up in, there's a ton of different tippets that you can use in fly lines. Use fluorocarbon 4X, 100% fluorocarbon, the expensive stuff, not the cheap stuff. There you go. Buy a big spool of it. You're set. Don't even talk to me about 7X, 8X, all that kind of stuff. Works in a very, very small percentage of time when you're fly fishing. And to be honest with you, if you're fishing tippet that's any less than 4X, 5X, 6X, 7X especially, you're going to tire out those trout, and then the mortality rate goes up, especially in the summer. So if you have 7X tippet on and you're fighting a fish and it's the summer, you let them go and they turn over, the fish is half dead when you let it go. So don't fish stuff that is too heavy or too light. 4X is fine for 99% of the time. 4X is perfect. The next thing is to make long casts, especially in a lake. The longer you can cast, the better in a lake. You're gonna catch more fish because you're covering more water. When you're fishing in lakes, start close, go medium length, and then you're gonna go out far, and then you're gonna strip that fly in or just let that fly sit. You're gonna catch way more fish. The farther you can cast in a river, the more fish you're gonna catch, because a lot of people think that the closer you're gonna fish, you're gonna catch, the closer you cast, you're gonna catch more fish. In fact, in my comments, I get a lot of times people say like, no, you can catch so many fish under 30 feet. That's true, but if you want to catch big fish, you have to cast to the places that other people can't cast to. That's where I catch all my big fish. And the places that you cannot wade to, places that you cannot cast to, or even if you do cast to that, you have 3 currents going in, you have to mend 3 different ways to get a nice drift in there, and most people don't have the skill to do that. I catch all my big fish on areas that other people cannot get to or cannot cast to. So that's a big tip if you're targeting big fish. Another thing is that big fish get big for a reason. They're always in locations that other people are not in. So for example, you're not gonna catch big fish in areas that just get pounded, because a lot of people, some people are unethical. They'll keep that fish, they get harassed a lot, they get caught. Those fish are either gonna move or just simply not get to the size if they just get caught over and over and over every day. So big fish are in areas that have a lot of structure, that are miles away from those public access areas or those boat launches. Around those areas, the big fish are away from there. That's why fishing in a drift boat is so effective, because you can get away from people and you can catch more consistent big fish, just in my opinion, than waiting. Now, if you want to put on the miles on your boots and you want to get to where those big fish are, they're big for a reason. Just think about like hunting. The good spots of hunting are out where other people are not. Same thing with fly fishing. Those big fish are there for a reason. Same thing with bass. Those fish are in very, very tight cover, and they're in areas that they can ambush very, very easily. So if you're fishing for bass and you want to target big bass, you're fishing for areas and times of the year like March, April, maybe September, where you're not catching all the little ones, you're catching the big ones. That's for bass. But for trout, you're just fishing water that is prone to having that's going to be in front of a rock, structured deep, the deepest holes that you can, that are really fast water with a really slow walking pace, deep hole. That's where you're gonna catch a big fish. The other thing is that don't fish by yourself. If you can get a bunch of buddies to go with you, especially if they're willing to try other things or they have more experience than you, you're gonna catch way more fish. So when I go fishing with my buddies, a lot of times they're better fishermen than I am. Those guys are just masters at catching fish. So it's really fun when they're on one side of the river, I'm on the other side of the river, and he's starting to hook up with fish, and I'm asking him, hey Jason, what are you using? He says, hey, this is the exact fly pattern that I'm using. I switch over, I start catching fish, or maybe I have one fly that's semi working, he has another one that's working very consistently. I'll end up re-rigging and putting his fly and my fly, and now I'm just getting double or triple the results. So fishing in pairs or in groups of people is actually a very effective way, because you're learning 2 different ways with 2 different fly patterns in 2 different areas on how to fish and how to catch those fish, versus just doing it all on your own with 1 fly or even 2 flies. Fishing with other people in groups is much more efficient in my opinion. Another thing about trout fishing is that you get good by doing. Anything, YouTube, fishing, anything, you get good by doing it. You get good at casting by casting. You get good at fly fishing and catching fish by consistently catching them. You get better at landing them. You learn these techniques of how to let them go in the water versus actually even needing a net, so that you're just pumping through those fish. You're catch and release. It's a very nice way to let those fish go. And I have very strong opinions on how you let fish go, because I see a lot of people bring them up to the bank, squeeze them. That's a very big thing that that I don't like. When you're holding a fish, you do not need to squeeze that fish. There is a way that you can lightly take that fish and just pop that hook out really quickly. Maybe I'll do another video on that someday. But you learn all these things by doing. Guides get good at fishing and learning to be guides by just doing it over and over and over. Some of the guides in Montana that I know are excellent at what they do because they're just doing it. They're breathing it every day. They're talking to their buddies, what's working. Sometimes they'll go in groups. They'll have like a float parade. They'll have 2 or 3 boats with clients in there. That's 4 to 6 clients that are in there. That's a lot of flies in the water. And those guides are working and they're working together. So the more you get out and the more you do it, the better you're going to get. Another thing is that your trout fly needs to be on the bottom. This is absolutely huge. If your fly is not on the bottom, you will not catch fish. If you're fishing in a hatch situation where fish are rising left and right, they're rising, they're going back down, they're moving left and right, you can see them, things are kind of chaotic, you can catch them on nymphs all day long just like you can dry flies. A lot of people are really quick to put on the dry fly, but you can catch them with nymphs. But if you're not fishing on the bottom, they will not even see it. If you don't have enough weight and you're not slowly seeing a little tick on the bottom every once in a while, you're not deep enough and those fish won't even look at your fly, because all of that, they want to sit on the bottom because it's a nice current, nice pace for them. And the food just gets fed to them like a conveyor belt. So would you eat something, if you had a conveyor belt of Skittles that is coming right to you, all of a sudden one goes floating over your head like 2 feet, are you just gonna stand up and try to eat that one? No, because you can already see another conveyor belt of another one coming down at a consistent rate. That's exactly how fish are. A lot of times fish are lazy, and if there's a fly that is way above them, they're not gonna eat it. Now in lakes, it's a little bit different because fish will look up, but fish will not look down. So you have to figure out the level they're eating in a lake. Otherwise, they're not gonna look down. Fish in a lake will not look down. They will only look straight forward, which is what they like, a little bit up. And maybe if they're looking at dry flies, they'll look up at the surface to see if there's movement, but they won't look down. So a little bit opposite in a lake. Eat subsurface 90% of the time. 90% of the time, those trout are eating subsurface and not at the top. Everybody wants to fish dry flies. It's an exciting time. You get to see them come up and eat your fly and sip it slowly, and half the time you miss because you set it too much. I do that all the time still today, but fish feed 90% below the surface. So if you're fly fishing and you're not catching anything, it's probably because you're not getting the fly to the bottom and you're not realizing, honestly, it's not as much fun fishing to fish a bobber versus a dry fly, but if you want to catch fish, you're fishing off of the bottom. 100% on the bottom, to the point where you're getting stuff hung up because you have too much weight, or your flies are just catching stuff on the bottom. That is the strike zone. Just keep with it. When you are dry fly fishing, very seldomly I'll get a good dry fly situation where I'm only fishing dry flies, but when that does happen and their noses are coming out of the water and they're not eating emergers, when they're eating dry flies, you're seeing the fish's nose come out of the water and sip on dry flies. It's a very, very small window of opportunity, but it's really fun. Everybody wants to do this. The best tip that I can give you is to set the hook after they've gone back to where they were originally. This takes 3 to 4 seconds, and it's the worst thing you can do as a fly fisherman is set it too early. And 90% of the time what people are doing, and I do this all the time myself, is a fish comes up and you have that dry fly and it takes it and you're setting the hook about now. Let them come up and take it and go down. They're gonna go all the way down. When the fish goes down, the profile of the fish is down. The fly's in a perfect position for you to you don't have to slam it. It's not a bass hook set. You're just going to simply lift up on your rod, just very, almost like a little lazy, like you don't even care, gentle hook set, and you will hook 90% more fish than you will if you just, hook it really fast or come off to the side. What you're looking for is setting the hook as slowly as you can with those dry fly hooks. Tailwater rivers and freestone rivers are totally different. They're totally different animals. They fish different. One is moody and one is consistent. Tailwaters are very consistent, but they're very, very specific. You have to be on your game. You have to have a perfect drift. And you could go over a fish 20 times until the 21st time and actually you get a hook set with the same fly and the same setup, because those fish are so picky and so particular. On rivers like the Beaverhead in Montana and those tailwater rivers, you have to be on your game, and you have to be very, very quick, and you have to be on your A game, because those fish see thousands of flies every month, hundreds every day, and you have to be on your game. Whereas a freestone river is a little bit more forgiving, but it's a little bit more moody. It's a little bit more hit or miss, and you can get away with more on the bigger sizes of flies nobody's gonna like drag on their flies, but you're gonna get away with more on a freestone than you will with a tailwater fishery. And just know that those two are totally different animals when you're fishing. So don't take advice from one river and apply that to another. Those are two different categories for you to consider when you're learning how to fish them. And lastly is, if you do not know what to do and you want to learn what flies to use and what techniques to use, you just want to get out there and you want to learn on your own, get into a hatch situation is by far the best way to learn what flies to use. Why are they refusing your flies? Is my drag okay? Because you're going to see those fish, you know where they are. It is the easiest way to learn, is to figure out when the time of the hatch is. Once you learn that, that is the best way to learn all these different skills. Am I casting right? In fly fishing, you have all these different variables. And unfortunately, it's very arduous to decide, is it my fly? Is it my fly line? Is it my tippet? There's so many variables, you don't know which one it is, so you can't narrow those down. And that's where people get really good at fly fishing, is they just know which variables to eliminate so that they can focus on maybe this fly versus this one. So that when people are down to one variable, they can catch a lot of fish between a size 16 and 18. That's when you know you have it dialed in. But if you don't even know where to fish, then there's so many different variables. It's frustrating. I've been a fly fisherman my whole life. I've been beginner, intermediate, advanced, and I can tell you when you're in those stages of beginner and you don't know what's going on, try to fish during a hatch or just hire a guide and say, hey, talk me through this hatch. Why are we using this fly? Why are we using this depth? Why are we using this type of bobber? Teach me about this. Watch my drift. Can you coach me on my mending? I just want to learn how to mend. And go fishing with an approach of, I'm going to learn how to get good. And the best way to do that is in a hatch situation where you can see where the fish are and you can see why they're refusing your fly. That's the best way to learn, in my opinion, versus just going out and just figuring it out. And you're like, man, this is just not very fun because I'm not catching anything. So hopefully I got this into 15 minutes. Honestly, after I edit this video, I can guarantee this is going to be a little bit more than 15 minutes. So a little bit more bonus footage here for you. But hopefully you learned a lot. If you did, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. If there's anything else that you want to teach other people that maybe they can learn of from our comments or your comments specifically, just leave it in the comment section. Anything more that you would like to add. There's about 100 more things that I could add, but I'm trying to keep 90% of fly fishing down into a 15-minute video. With that said, thank you for watching and stay tuned for more. A lot of other videos coming up, a lot of cool locations that we're gonna go, places we're gonna fish, steelhead, trout this next year. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching.